so much for joining us wherever you are. My name is Tim. I come from the CluedIn team, and today's topic is all about how to tie data governance to some type of key business metrics. How does it affect, as some say, the bottom line or the top line of a business? And I'm joined here by a good friend of ours here at CluedIn, Alex. And why don't you introduce yourself, Alex?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, team. Hi, everybody. So my name is Aleksejs. I use common for Alex just for everybody's happiness in the international audience. I've been a data leader at Microsoft for about 15 years, implementing data management, data governance, analytics as well. And, we won't keep AI in that space either. So been a long journey. As you see, also wrote a book even about this. It was so exciting to kind of drive Microsoft through that change, of perceiving data historically through like very low end and then growing up and having this as a true value. So a lot of fun on this journey, and so happy to talk about, how we did some things in the data governance space as well.
Sounds great. So Alex and I had this meeting before this where we kind of thought, what's the best value we could provide to the audience joining us? And I would say Alex and I both consider ourselves practitioners, very hands-on practitioners as well. Alex obviously has that background from, working on the data strategy at a little company called Microsoft. And I'm sure there's some very unique and intricate challenges they received there. And so instead of a set of slides, Alex and I thought the best way for us to provide value was having an open discussion about asking each other some pretty pertinent and maybe edgy and tricky questions that are asked often in our industry, but maybe something that Alex and I are not always happy with the answer that's kind of received, and kind of driving in and really digging into the depths of those. And some of the discussion points before this that we thought we might be going into. Let's see where the discussion goes, Alex, but more organically and naturally. But, some of the topics that we might end up going into is, things like what are the different elements of data governance? There's the offensive parts, and then there's the defensive parts. Maybe that's some discussion points that we'll get into. But the key point here is Alex and I are going to try for the audience to drive this back to some type of key, tangible, direct, measurable impact that can happen to a business based off a data governance framework and a data governance initiative at a business. So with that, I'm going to do what I promised. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and it's just going to be me and Alex for a while. Now, Alex, let's start in a place maybe not necessarily data governance related, but in some way, I guess it indirectly is. I would say about 3 years ago, I did this really silly thing, Alex, where I decided to write a book. And for the first 2 months, I was having a great time until I met my copywriter. And they reminded me of I have to fix all my bad tense and bad grammar and bad spelling. And that's what ensued was the next 4 months of just not the most happy part of my life. You just went through the same kind of fun. And so talk us through a little bit about the book, what gave you kind of the inspiration to go off and actually kind of look into it. But I think it would be interesting for all of those watching along at home is if you could go back to the start of kind of that inception of the book, is there anything you would kind of tell yourself different about what to do this time around?
Yeah, that's great question, Tim. So thank you for this. And I totally share your experience with the copywriter. So I had very much the same. Not only 4 months long, but it was still very challenging at the moment where you feel you're almost done with the book and kind of willing to handle it straight to the production. And then you get a person who validates every single word, every single comma, like everything. So that was tough. Nevertheless, I'm still happy about taking a challenge on the book, and ironically, didn't came as my own initiative. Yeah, so I was contacted by the publisher, and they kind of pitched me this idea. They say like, "Hey, we're looking on your, journey with Microsoft. There is definitely something you would love to share from like how Microsoft became, the company we know it today from all that data and AI strengths and so on. And I felt like, wow, that's actually a cool idea, right? Because we had so many things, from those early stages and, learning the data architecture, learning many concepts, kind of inventing the things ourselves. I was sometimes sharing this thing that Microsoft came into the data mesh at the same time as the data mesh principle was announced. And so we had this very interesting conversation with the inventor of the data mesh. But it was really about summarizing that story in a way that any company, whenever it's an enterprise or a smaller one, can find something for them, right? They can take this, list kind of through the pages and say, okay, we are on that early stage. And so there is something relevant for us. Or if it's a already well modern enterprise, which uses a lot of data-driven analytics and so on, they can still find something in the end of this book, which says about more advanced capabilities, or they simply learn, right? At Microsoft, for example, we had phenomenal challenge and problem with, guess what, with MDM. and it was a path of kind of trying and failing for a variety of the reasons. And I felt like, again, these projects are typically very expensive, at least in this traditional implementation way, they are very expensive. So how can we share upfront those things about, failing on MDM several times, and maybe somebody will take it for the better?
Yeah, it makes sense. So I'm glad the book's out. I'm sure you're glad the book is out as well. At the end of this, we'll be sharing a link with everyone so they can go off and get their own copy as well. But shifting into the kind of data governance discussion, I mean, where to start? I would say you and I seem to agree on a lot in this space. I would say we have a lot of shared views. We've had some good discussions in the past, and I would like to kind of understand a little bit of the opposite of this. Is there a particular kind of opinion you have in the data governance space or an approach to solving challenges in data governance that you think is kind of somewhat unique to you, or at least the masses don't share the same opinion with you? I'm kind of interested in like you picking your brain on like the contrarian ideas you have in this space, if any.
This is a good one. I think from my perspective, the best way to kind of position the data governance is through some storytelling. And the reason I'm so much indexing on the storytelling is not only because people typically understand much better when you give those stories, when you give those examples, but also because it abstracts us from the actual technology underneath, right? And so if we think today in a traditional way of the data governance initiatives, people immediately, start to go down to the data catalogs, to the MDM, to the lineage, and then it's quickly become the conversation about like which technology, which tools, which kind of don'ts and do's, and things like this. What's important from my perspective is that the notion of kind of a governing data is here and will remain. And the technology underneath might change quite a bit, right? So if we think where we are today, where we came from, like a SQL database is created in the 70s, and now we are starting more to vectorize the data, and we're starting to use LLMs as kind of a enclosed, models with some specific data solutions as well. So I think from that future perspective, there will be much more of those vectors and LLMs and so on, which are tailored for the data governance purposes. So the technology will change drastically. I think so, but the notion and the meaning, like why we're doing this and how we land that acceptance and that willingness to perform the data governance as the purposeful work, they should not change.
Yeah, okay. And you think there's a mass of people that disagree with you?
Well, what do you think? Like, do you think we will really run the way we run it today, or you foresee some change as well, especially as we have more complexity?
I think, the things that I've experienced in my career and exposure is that we go through cycles in technology, and there's this pendulum that swings for all different types of things, like, let's focus on agility now, and then it shifts back towards rigidity, and let's focus on centralization, and then it shifts to decentralization, and then it shifts in between. I think there's a couple of key things I've learned from an engineering perspective that has always rung true. Number one is that the answer is never on the peripherals, it's somewhere in between. And so, this focus on federation of data governance versus centralization or decentralization is something I strongly believe in, but I would say it's not a contrarian view. I would certainly hope most people would think the same. I would say, you're probably opening a can of worms asking me that question, Alex, but on contrarian views, but I would say a couple, and it's interesting is that the example you just give, that's a great example of something you and I don't think we see eye to eye on, which is interesting is that often in the industry, you'll hear people talk about that, a good data initiative is made up of these kind of core pillars of technology, people, process, culture. Maybe there's some other ones, but they're the common ones that I hear. I would say my kind of contrarian view that I don't think a lot of people share is how understated good technology actually makes the others easier. In that I can give you some very prime examples of where even at CluedIn, we've chosen particular technologies to, host our CRM or host our website, where that technology decision made all of the other parts fundamentally easier. Whereas sometimes you will have to cater for maybe a technology gap that's saying, okay, well, we have to be better on process because the technology is not helping us as much. So I'd say one of the things that I don't think a lot of people are going to agree with me necessarily on in the data governance space is don't underestimate the power of choosing a good technology. And I do actually believe making the wrong choice there does make a substantial pivot in the road in successful projects. I do realize you have to have those other pieces, but oh man, a good technology kind of helps. But I would say it's a good example you gave, because I would say even immediately that's one that I think you and I would argue for the next 2 hours and 3 hours quite happily on. But the time is ticking, so maybe for the audience, Alex, don't you have these discussions with clients, and I'm sure you have this at Microsoft as well, where it's maybe foreseen that data governance, it's hard to tie back to some kind of tangible business metric, but do you have an example? And I'm hoping the audience can kind of leverage this as well, because often we have to build use cases to invest in data governance programs, and we're looking for these little tidbits, these just amazing ideas for do you have a good example you can give everyone where data governance actually hit the bottom or the top line?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's what we used almost as the strategy actually at Microsoft. So we try to always find those examples, or if we've been just simply facing those examples as the part of our rhythm of the business, we would record them and we would kind of reuse them as those stories to tell and as those stories to to influence the future of those decisions. And I can give you a couple of those, and so for me, when we respectively kind of nail down why do we have this data governance, is simply because we want to have an excellent data which we trust, in which we can pilot for all the different purposes that enterprise needs for, right? And so there is different things, again, pivoting on what you said, there's offensive, defensive, two very different examples. So one is I'm getting a call from the HR partner, global HR partner, which tells me that, we need to speak. And so in a large corporation, I would say it's never a good sign when you have a call with HR partner, right? So let's start from this. So I'm getting a little bit worried. And then she tells me that I have an employee in South Africa, and as a global team, we really had employees distributed all across the world. And so this employee is likely to get a very huge payment down in the coming days. And she wanted to validate whenever this was really intended to be so. And normally they don't question it, but because it's just the one person who reports to the global team versus reports locally, they were kind of unsure, so the amount is like very high and they don't have this type of typical payments in South Africa. And so it triggers to me immediately, okay, something went wrong with the data, right? Because as a manager, I'm knowing for sure there shouldn't be any payment. And so we start to dig down like what happened. And what actually happened was that the person, since she was reporting to the global team, she was automatically converted the currency code for her salary from the South African rand to the USD. And so every amount which was there was automatically uplifted to the USD. Right?
Yeah.
And if you Google the difference, it's quite a bit. So I think it's a 10 times or something. Yeah. And so we've been, of course, like shocked, like how this could happen and so on. And we went through, the whole exercise, and we found that we have a good metadata actually, and we have a pretty good tier one systems like CRM and revenue management and payroll and so on. But we don't have that tight and well orchestrated circle of managing metadata and how this metadata basically gets into the tier one systems and how it gets accepted by tier one systems. Right. And we kind of receive that signal back that yes, your metadata, which has changed or operated, is in full synchronization with your business line of applications. And so these type of things were realized, okay, we have to put, first of all, really good governance of every single metadata change. Every business metadata definition whatsoever needs to be governed, needs to have a data stewardship. And then we need to have the synchronization, and we need to validate that synchronization every time we do it so that we are sure we're not hitting any troubles with this, right? Mm-hmm. And, you may call this as a compliance exercise. You may call it as kind of defensive. Yeah, it's defensive, but it was really helping to sort out, all these potential challenges in-house. And we've been thinking ourselves for many years afterwards that we put that centralized program of governing this metadata and governing applied side of the metadata within the business domains, so that we are always sure, right? Whatever we will be talking about, financial data, HR data, different, skills, industries, segments, whatever you call it within the enterprise, but having that strong fishbone, which you can rely and say, okay, we have it. There is a process. The process is governed as well. So we are fully secure and we trust the system.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of like the mentality of like, with a good foundation, you can run. But without a good foundation, you're probably going to trip up along the way. And one of the things, when anyone is kind of looking into the MDM area, one of the things I often kind of try to give them an example of is, it turns out when you reach a certain size or complexity within a business, certain types of data become so important that something wrong with it genuinely can affect the top and bottom line. And it can be something that's like, the costs are blowing out for managing a process. It could be something like, unfortunately, we send the invoices to the wrong address and, 60 days payment goes by and you're not getting anything in, and you go, oh, well, what do you do? Why are you not paying? It's like, well, I've got a data problem. You're like, well, now I've got a cash flow issue. That's things that actually hit the bottom and top line. And I think the more complex you become as a business, and Microsoft would be such a great example of such complexity, that you start to necessitate the need to cracking some of these challenges. I'm I'm interested in, like, this is a loaded question potentially. This is a tricky one I've got. I'm not sure how I ask it, but I'm going to ask it and then it might come out silly, but let's just go with it anyway. Is if you've got a company that is wanting to do a data analytics use case or a data governance, or let's just say it differently. Let's just say you are a greenfield company, and you're saying, right, I've got the choice between doing a data analytics initiative or a data governance initiative. What advice would you give to that company of like, what order do you do that in? Where would you expect the ROI to come in? Where's the biggest bang for buck? Which one's going to affect the bottom line versus top line? Does analytics more affect the top line, the revenue and the margin? And data governance affect more of the bottom line, like efficiency and risk? Like what advice would you give them on that path? Which, by the way, lots of people are in that space right now.
It's a powerful view on this. To me, they absolutely interrelated, right? And you often use the analytics as your kind of flagship, right? Nowadays we use AI, right? So everything is kind of AI driven or have this AI flag. But underneath, you have to get the data, right? And it's not just about the data quality, it's really about enabling that analytical component to function based on that foundational data assets or whatever you have there. I will give you another example on this. Again, as I say, I love sharing stories, right? So we had this interesting case where, and it's a true story, absolutely true story. I just will not call the customer name in that space. So we got a huge executive escalation. One day, Satya Nadella on a Sunday receives a call from one of his peers in the large CEO of aviation company in US. And he says, well, my booking system is blocked and we're not able to sell the tickets and proceed with all the operational guidelines because your Azure capacity doesn't work. And so how is that, right? You have your primary top customer, which you typically surround with all that care and customer, centric views, and you have those account managers and everything. And it doesn't work, right? And it doesn't work to the extent that a CEO of a company should find through his private way to call Satya and say, could you fix it in your Microsoft site? So we, of course, a lot of people got jumped into this. We unpacked the case. We kind of looked through what actually happened. So what actually happened was, so Azure team, they pivoted this kind of 360 view on everything which is in Azure for the customers, right? And they had this beautiful dashboards showing the capacity and like where you need to trigger something and tweak. And they did a marvelous work on this. What they didn't find out is that one of the components of that aviation kind of customer structure was a small company sitting far away from that identified kind of customer side, right? They were like a subcontractor, which was providing an important function in that booking system, but they haven't been visible on our side as the part of that customer. They've been visible as a small separate company, which has nothing to do with this aviation industry. And so when we realized that, we immediately kind of connected them into that common tree, and we started, to give the right capacity and priority of the ticket supports and everything, right? But beforehand, they were unfortunately kind of sitting on the line and waiting until somebody picks up them as a small customer versus, this enterprise name. So we realized you have this analytical view which powers entire business proposition, right? Because you giving this in the flight capacity management of Azure, you promise to the customer that they can flex in and out, up and down and so on. But your powerful analytical thing misses this fundamental component of the data, which was not accurately governed and kind of nailed down to the right structure. So the whole thing starts to break out immediately, right? And we had to go back and kind of rebuild and create this, kind of a highly curated view of those top customers, which now would truly and finally power the analytics without being in that type of a situation, because it was very awkward case. And the good side of this, that a part of the fixing this as an issue itself, we use this as the small kind of a component of the MDM. So like why MDM helps, even within one domain. So we're not talking about pan-enterprise implementation, but even having this highly curated MDM component in the one domain of, Azure team already helps them tremendously to run and deliver on the promise, right? And if we can reuse it elsewhere, which we did later on, it's even more power.
So, I mean, like, I'm the CDO of Nike. I come to you, Alex, and I go, right, I've got $1 million and I've got all these things to implement. Data analytics, data governance. I've also got maybe, an ERP that I've got to put in. Like, what order do you do it in? Do you do little bits of each? Do you go fast with the analytics to try and hit the top line? Do you put a foundation in place? I mean, Alex, what I found is that there's always a good analogy that can fit any story that you're wanting to tell. Like, I'm sure we could sit here and say, would you build your house on a bad foundation? We go, no, I mean, I wouldn't do that. But I would say building a house and technology stack, in some ways, you can't compare those pieces. So what would be like the direct, like, could you give like any direct input on that? Or is it too like, giving that advice would be too generic?
I firmly believe, and I hope it's not a generic answer, but I firmly believe that the data should be owned by the business. Right? Which means that all what you've mentioned about, where do we implement, one or another data initiative, these data initiatives today still mostly sits with the data teams or with certain IT enablement.
I see it.
So
yeah.
This is where I would kind of flip this thing over and say, okay, where is your biggest pain point is today? So apart of everything which you listed, from what you could do with data, but actually, if we're looking on the biggest pain point today in the enterprise, what is what we can do with data to resolve a pain point? And if we have this ability, can we give this ability to the business to own this component and start to drive it? And as they start to drive it, because they really want to innovate, they want to remove that pain point, we will see what we actually should do for this. Is this an analytical component which should go first to create more informative space? Should it be maybe some operational, quickly ramped up data governance initiative, which helps, to structure the process? So I would really first and foremost prioritize like what is that business pain point and how can we flip that, that driving side, that North Star side, to the business to say this is what we want out of the data which we operating. And this is where we want the company to go. This is where we want to innovate with our products or, whatever we do with the business. And then you start to kind of going down and see, okay, what you actually should enable and how quickly to make it happen. Yeah, that would be my kind of approach to this. So I don't know what you think about that.
So, I mean, first of all, I would argue that I don't blame companies, and I would probably do the same thing, to start off with the analytics initiatives, because I've always lived by this kind of 80-20 rule where, like, you can get a lot of value in the 80% without an immense amount of effort, but you need to be completely aware that when you hit that 80%, you will stall and that you'll get diminishing returns at that point. And for me, I think there's logic in saying, well, businesses are, they want to see value, not necessarily. I hate this kind of like they want to see it quickly, but I also think that a lot of businesses want to see it responsibly as well, as in like I want it predictable and I want it. I'd rather regular small updates than this big bang in 12 months. We all hope it's going to work, and so for me, I think that the way I see companies doing it is, in a greenfield approach, they find themselves wanting to accelerate with these things that hit the top line, i.e., I can provide my sales team with insights. I can provide my marketing team with segmentations. I can provide my finance and accounting teams with, like 80% quality numbers around for good budgeting and things like this. But I think the biggest thing is just to be completely aware you will hit this stall point. So one of your old teammates uh, in the from the Microsoft Purview team, I know he likes smoking meat, right? And what an odd
I know who
direction
is
to
that,
take this. You
yeah.
know who it is, right? And so when you're smoking a brisket, you have this thing called the stall, where I think in centigrade is around 69 degrees centigrade, where the meat just doesn't go up in temperature. And I would say, what a silly analogy to provide for this, but I'd say it's just to be like aware that there'll be this pivot point where your shift to focusing on data governance, you'll see this a lot of ROI, whereas you'll stall with the analytics because you'll be dealing with these intricacies like people looking at a beautiful looking chart. Looks great. Data's flowing through. It scales. Great. Yeah, but now like I'm questioning the data. Where did it come from? What's the process that made it get there? What else can I do with it? Who do I talk to if I've got a problem? And these are all immense accelerators. And I would say, data governance, I think at the start seems to have in my experience, man, it can really affect the bottom line a lot. And just simple examples would be, how many companies have you talked to, Alex? And I'm sure we do the same here still, and I'm sure Microsoft still does the same as well, is how much of our operations actually still work off passing Excel sheets around to each other. And so you can just imagine getting that and putting it into an operational data governance program, like often that pays for itself on the bottom line of just like operational costs of moving things around and time saved in not having to work in this somewhat asynchronous nature where you've got to wait for that person to respond before you take over. And so I think I think from my perspective, the answer is analytics has this real appeal of 80% I can get some value pretty quick, and it can really affect the top line in regards to like fueling the front end of my business with the insights, although at 80% quality that they need. And then data governance kind of coming up the back to say, yeah, now it's time to just mature things a little bit. And that's where the kind of ROI starts to take over.
And Tim, there is a good motion nowadays as well about exactly what you described. So we have this much more becoming common, this paradigm of integrating operational and analytical data together, right? So it was more difficult in the past. Now with different type of technology, it's becoming easier. But what I found as well is then when you're trying to do it, like in our example, we tried to put some analytical component, the metric, and integrate it straight into the operational view, right? So you would be in a CRM, but you will see that analytical indicator, which would be extremely powerful, right? And when we started to lay out this principle and the concept and idea, all the business teams really like it. Yeah, they say like, wow, this would be so powerful because we could just see it, and we based on this, we could do this and this. And so the technical side of this was not as difficult to make as to, first of all, agree entirely and all down through every single component. What is this metric? How it's calculated in all the variations of our customer base and so on and so on. So it provides this really unambiguous view when it's visible for the person in operations. And then actually to make that whole data path to that screen where it represents the true value, right?
Yeah.
So it's like this flip side when the people say like, imagine it will be visible for 30,000 sellers at Microsoft as this ultimate indicator. And we've been on the other side and we say, okay, now think about the data and imagine there are 30,000 people looking on this indicator and they should trust it.
Yep. They'll question it. The first thing, and this is the funny thing, is like, this is what I've seen with our customers that have implemented some of the pillars of data mesh, or at least the concepts, the main one being data products that they're implementing, is some of the first things that people start to ask when you put data out there and you proliferate throughout the business is some weird things start to happen. Number one is that people seem to set their standards up for what's the best data product that we put out there. And so often people will put this amazing single view of a customer out there, and it's really sexy. And it's got like beautiful data, clean, uniform. It can, like, you can pull it into Excel, you can pull it into Power BI, you can pull it into Fabric, you can easily pull it into the Dataverse and start working with it. And what happens is for the other data products, they somewhat take a back seat, I've seen, where people are like, well, I'll wait until the integrity is up to the kind of this level. And when you think about it, actually, that's not really odd. We do that in so many kind of consumer-based things as well, where we set the standard as, I don't know, like the iPhone, and everything else is probably super impressive still, but still, it's like we kind of set these standards. So, Alex, shifting gears slightly, you started a new company, chiefdata.ai. And I'm always intrigued when people start companies because you've got to have a lot of conviction to, or at least ambition, conviction, but it's kind of like you've got to have this like this key, something that is so important for the rest of the world to know that you would go out and say, I need to make this a big part of my many years upcoming. What's chiefdata.ai about, and what's this conviction that you have that's so important that other people need to know?
No, it's wonderful. I think it's my firm belief into education. It's my firm belief into education which drives people growth and knowledge and ability to be better and to perform better. And, when I saw that we have on one side a lot of demand for data and AI talent and knowledge, and like, how do you do the things, right? What you just said, these examples with implementing different technologies and, let's say, data governance solutions and so on. And I haven't find that, ultimate an easy source where you could get that type of knowledge and educate yourself in a highly democratized way. You can go to some courses which is offered by many universities. They typically quite tailored, which is good. You have some pan-European initiatives, which I'm also part of. It's called European Data Masterclass. And we're educating also the community in Europe about everything which is in the modern data you need to know. And we even support them kind of in a day-to-day business. But then I still was thinking about, we have thousands of data professionals, especially outside of Europe. When you think about, large countries where we have outsourced operations in India, in China, in, Latin America, we have so many kind of growing talent. And where does that talent can source the knowledge which would help them to progress through their careers, to find their next job into data governance or in a data stewardship or anything of that sort. So how do you get that in an easy way? Something which is, from one side, it's very trusted knowledge and authentic. So it's not sourced, somewhere from the internet without any, real boundary besides us. And also you have, in an easy way, you just like, this ChatGPT example where you go and you just about the things, right? And you get certain educational aspects to you immediately for free or for a very moderate price, I would say. So that was the idea besides us, like, how can we imagine a persona, which would be kind of a chief data and AI officer, and when you virtualize that persona and make it scalable for anyone to chat with, right? And get like whatever you want. You want a data governance advisory and knowledge, you go for that. You want to have some idea, how do you transit maybe between the disciplines and, get a better career path. You can do that as well, right? You want to have those data mesh examples, you go for that, right? So that's what is besides this idea, and I'm not doing it alone. So I have a team of contributors. I have some really good partners, which also collected a lot of that lifetime, very tested and authentic expertise. And that's what we wanted to land with any growing data professional.
So the good part is, Alex, is that I can validate that your website marketing message is spot on, because that's what I interpreted Chief Data AI as. I interpreted it as two things. I interpreted it as basically a large language model that's been embodied with the knowledge from lots of people. So if I am a chief data officer, that was one way I thought of like, and I need a buddy that's like, well, how are other people doing this? Or what is the best practices if I've got many ERP systems and I've got a migration challenge, and you can kind of instill the knowledge. I had a question on it, which was, have you actually taken the book and put it into a large language model as well?
Not exactly, but there is a lot of materials. There are a lot of materials which were created on the time of writing the book. And so not many of them landed in the book exactly as the book was kind of designed for. So we have kind of additional articles, in a more detailed explanation, which is exactly more suitable for that type of conversational AI capability versus, for the book where you still expected, in a more concise and kind of more precise way, right? So this is for me the difference. So the book is the book, but there is a much of that information which even more kind of surrounded and augmented with the details, which lands in that chief data AI.
Makes sense. So I'm going to
there is a place for your book as well.
It's called The Bin. It's called The Bin, Ali. No. So I actually am in the middle of writing the second version of it, and this time I'm going to get the tense and the grammar and the spelling correct up front, because I'll just ask ChatGPT to write the whole thing for me. So I'm going to ask Alex, because I've got you here, I'm going to ask these really annoying questions. And I say it's annoying because, number one, I actually have not been able to figure out the answer by myself. And they are questions that sometimes I would say grind on me and potentially grind on you, because we're in this space of data governance, and it's often the case until you've kind of been buried in it, you sometimes don't understand the importance of it. And it's easy for you and I to sit here as practitioners and say, why is everybody else not paying attention? This is so obvious. Why? And I'm sure we are annoying to the other crowd that's just, like, yeah, but look, I'm getting some stuff done over here, and I'm not necessarily running into those problems and things like this. So I guess my question is, like, how, there's multiple parts. I'm just gonna ad lib with this a little bit. It's really hard to measure the success of initiatives, data initiatives, analytics, and governance. We've all seen these metrics like this technology or this framework makes me go 80% faster or things like this. And between you and me, I look at them and I go, oh, come on. Like, to measure those types of things are so hard. And it's not the kind of, the fact that that's a direct input to that is rarely the case. It's usually one of many indirect pieces that add up to that. But if someone, obviously, people on this call, they need to somehow quantify some type of ROI on data governance, because the bottom line is most people have to go out, they have to ask for a budget, they have to build a business use case. And so I would say, can you give any input to those that are building that right now of what are some of the kind of like the benefits are often with data governance assigned with like long-term and like strategic, and we'll see the payoff in kind of three or 4 years. But do you have any good examples of like immediate cost saving or immediate revenue gaining? I mean, let's be honest, those are the kind of core metrics of any business, right? There is the top and the bottom line, and behind that is this complex web of making sure employees are happy, making sure, you are diverse in hiring, making sure that you're doing some good impact in the world. These are all good metrics and great metrics a business should have. But at the bottom line, it comes down to there's a profit, margin, revenue, operational risk, operational costs. So any like immediate cost saving examples you can provide?
Absolutely. And I will start with just noting the fact, for me, data initiatives, any data initiatives, whenever it's a governance, analytics, or whatever your data management, we always were connecting them through, the top level metrics in the company. So these OKRs,
Yeah.
we have to get this explicit connection, and we had to give one of those, so-called currencies within the enterprise, which are really accepted, so it's a time save, or it's a money, or it's a satisfaction, or it's, something very tangible. And so in this space, there are two things which immediately comes in mind. We did, for example, an initiative in the data governance in CRM space. And we implemented this in flight, kind of allowing people to still proceed in a way they would normally do. But we will capture, their input, and we will show afterwards that there is a rework required for the data to be really excellent, right? And we understand that they are in rush. We understand that they're performing first and foremost their business function and not the data function. But there is this component of the rework, which anyhow will hit them at some point of time. And it's much faster and easier to make it on a first time right versus to fix it later on. But we haven't kind of, arguing on this. We just give him ability to proceed with the data. We will capture later on. We will start to publish some dashboards, which we will make available to the managers and say like, hey, this is the natural dynamics of how the data is being filled in the CRM. And you see that human nature kind of pops up at some point of time. And you see that one region or one team starts to perform much better. So they show, much more this kind of first time right approach, and they stop, kind of pouring the bad data in the CRM. And you see like, okay, so this is actually working for them. And you start to challenge others. And so the others kind of now becoming competitive because they see like, oh, why this area is able to do it and we're not, right? So they also uplift a little bit. And the point going to the metrics now is that you say, now you have already data, which you spend way less time preparing for anything you do afterwards in this lead to order business process or in the marketing. And we could calculate, we can precisely calculate how much time you've saved because we know these procedures. We know how much it takes to proceed with 10 records on an entry versus fixing them afterwards, where you need much more information to kind of resemble and put it through. And we started to calculate this. We call it, time back to sales, right? There was a separate metric, time back to sales. And if you take this across, 30,000 sellers at a company, even for some, 3 or 4 months period, it's becoming a factual amount of hours, which transforms into that productivity, where people, not spending time on something which they, shouldn't do. And the second aspect is even more interesting on this, so that you may say, it's more kind of a defensive side. And the offensive side, we said, what if you have a data which someone else wants to buy and pay for? Wouldn't this demonstrate the excellence of the curation and quality of the data if you have a persona or some business which wants to buy that data? And we got to that point, we created curated feed to our partners at Microsoft, which were happy to pay for those curated data sets as they saw them immediately applicable for cross-sales and kind of upsales initiatives. And when we started to benefit from this, we actually earned real money from the partners. And we came back and say, like, this is the testament that if you have a data governance enabled to the point that an external party is willing to pay, voluntary, willing to pay for this data to drive their own business, which in fact also benefits Microsoft business, that's where you should stop asking the questions why we're investing into the governance.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually, the funny thing is that was going to be my next question. Is I was going to interrupt as this, pessimistic person saying, yeah, the data governance is usually on the defensive side. It's about shutting down and policies. And, let's be honest, we've been given many examples of like, oh, something went wrong, and so we have to start closing down ship. And I think this is something that we often associate with data governance. And then I think what we, as practitioners, should be spending so much more of our time on is those offensive parts. And you came up with a great example there. I have many examples I can lean on. One of them is we did this initiative to build a custom onboarding Copilot for a customer, where they realized onboarding new employees, and they have lots of employees, and the issue is that their churn rate on employees, their turnover rate was high because they're in this industry that just expects it, like high turnover rate. So this is call support, like a call center, high turnover rates. And so you can imagine that onboarding process of making sure that new employees can get up to speed really quick. That is a great offensive type of piece. But through building that initiative, they realized that the data they were feeding into the Copilot led in the other direction, which was giving the wrong answers, the wrong guidance, and a good old SharePoint with an organization hierarchy was much more predictable and deterministic for them to use instead of using this Copilot. But working on that kind of putting those foundations in place of we're going to progressively increase the quality of the data, being able to see the fact that employees were onboarded quicker, they were up to speed, and their metric was, did they pass the onboarding tests? And that's very measurable. That's very measurable. You can say how many people passed before the Copilot and how many people passed after the Copilot. And was it quicker? Was it down from 6 weeks to 4 weeks? And that is tangible bottom line things that are saved. But it's top line as well, because all of those callers can get on the ground quicker, solving calls, which is what they get paid on as a business, is time to answer, time to support closed, like those types of elements as well. I guess I've probably got time for one more question, if that's okay, Alex. I'll choose wisely. I would say, let's think about the audience for a second. You've got a stretch of different people watching this, from global service partners to CluedIn customers to Microsoft customers, etc. You've got companies that are coming here to look for advice on, I'm just about to start a data governance program. And one of the main reasons I'm sure they joined this was, I've got to justify the investment. I've got to somehow show how this will save money. It will make money. It will onboard employees quicker. It'll de-risk the business from some regulatory issue or some data quality issue that caused some of the examples that you're talking about. And so if you had those people one-on-one in this room, what would your advice be to them in getting started? I mean, obviously, get the book. That's probably a great place to start. Learn from the scar tissue that Alex and team have built up at Microsoft. But what else advice would you give them?
I would suggest them to really focus first and foremost on their own confidence, right? To be confident that you are doing the right thing. Because when you have this inner confidence that you believe into what you do, right? You believe that having this great, managed, curated, structured, qualitative data helps to reach the goal. You can pass this confidence to the others. And, storytelling, exemplifying these metaphorical kind of connections between different organizations, they helps to land this message, right? And we see this pretty well working with, people from those highly regulated industries, or even in any enterprise, you have a highly regulated domain like finance, for example, right? And if you were able to land that message, like why certain definitions and, thorough process and so on matters, you have finance on your side, right? So finance would understand it. They would totally understand it, like why you need to be compliant, why you need to kind of dig into numbers and things of what defines those numbers and so on. And when you get this as already one of your, coalition partners, so to say, it's much easier to win the others. And it's a matter of kind of your own confidence, what you know what you're doing, what you're driving, and you believe into this, and you build that one by one, you build that coalition of your supporters who starts to, not only believe into what you do and believe into the data, but they start also to expand it further, and take others on the journey.
I think that's great. I think that's a great, and here's why I think it is, because I think it takes guts to put a data governance program in place, because it is tricky. And that one of the reasons it's tricky is that this is something that you can't bury in IT and engineering. It is about bridging the business and IT and building that harmony, and that is tricky. Often, with very IT engineering dominated projects, we can hide it a little bit, and that's fine, because I kind of need people that are technical at that level. But when you get into data governance, it's really about bringing the business in, and not to help you be technical, but help to impose their knowledge of the data into the data, the business. They work in the lines of business. They know the customers. They ring them up, and they can answer and tackle different data problems on the supply chain of data that IT can. It's about that kind of harmony. And so I think that's a great segue for us to close off. First of all, I want to provide a link to everybody to go get the book. These slides will be sent out to everybody afterwards. It's available on Amazon, I know, Alex. Where else can you get it?
On the Pact, the publisher site itself. Yeah, so you see it in the top right corner as well. Yep.
And so on the other piece, I just, one of the things Alex and I both, even though there were I think a couple of things we have different views on, one of them that we shared very clearly was the importance of how important the business is to be involved in the supply chain of data. And historically, I would argue that the majority of our data stacks have been predominantly made up of IT-centric tooling and technology. And there have been attempts, MDM and data governance for me. When I think about those practices, I really think about that's the business's opportunity to get involved. And so for that reason at CluedIn, we wanted to make it super easy for people to get started. And so in CluedIn, through the Azure Marketplace, the first 10,000 records are completely on us as CluedIn. And this is the full-fledged platform with the Copilot, with the large language model capabilities, with all those critical capabilities you would expect out of an MDM system. And the truth is, Alex, that 10,000, maybe, even for Microsoft, there's certain domains at Microsoft that fall under that 10,000 banner. And, you always want to start small anyway. And so even tackling the first 10,000 employees and getting that clean, it's a way to prove the value of MDM. And so I would always implore people to get started in small little chunks. And as our good joint friend Alex says as well, progression over perfection. And that's what this is really about here as well, is get started, lower the entry barrier. And this is just one of the ways at CluedIn that we are giving this out to the community, and look forward for those trying their MDM initiatives out. So Alex, with that, and to the audience, I want to close up for today. I want to thank you for your honest answers, even though some of these questions potentially were a little bit curveballed and in directions that maybe are a little bit sometimes tricky for practitioners like you and I to answer, because they get into these kind of wounds that we often deal with of like, do I really, like data governance, isn't that such a big initiative? Or, isn't that really just about control and shutting things down? I need to move fast. And I think speaking from two practitioners with plenty of experience, I would say that in the end, it turns out to be quite the opposite, ironically, in that it's really about putting these pillars in to be able to accelerate you through these other initiatives. And I think, Alex, you and I would both agree that things like AI have just accelerated the need for companies to put in a good foundation, in that we can all see, Alex, it's been so obvious, we can see the value that AI is already bringing and will continue to bring. And now we're in this race between how big is that gap going to be between the technology and your foundational reality. So with that in mind, Alex, thank you for your time. Thanks for the audience, and I hope you all have a fantastic day and night. So thank you for your time, guys.
Thank you,
Talk
team.
soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye bye bye. Bye bye bye.